You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Greeks Gridiron. I'm Ethan Haristadoulou, and today we are taking a look at the NFC West in some offensive rankings that we are doing. And let me remind you, again, offensive rankings only, not defenses, just looking at the scoring side of the football here. So we're talking NFC West, Seahawks, Cardinals, 49ers, Rams, taking a look at a division that felt like it was the 49ers for a handful of years, but last season that stranglehold on the division seems to have been loosened up a bit and is now kind of wide open for the taking, I would say. There is a lot to look at with this division here, and I would say some uncertainty, and I don't really know if there's any real clear front runner, but I was able to kind of organize these teams in the way I see fit. So I invite you all to comment down below. Let me hear from you all. Your thoughts, your opinions, your agreements, your disagreements, how you would rank this division from 4 through 1. Let me hear from you all. But like I said, looking at the NFC West, we're going to rank them 4 through number 1. And at the very bottom of my list here, this was probably the easiest one for me. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful manner to those of you that are the fans of the Seattle Seahawks. But a lot of this starts and ends with the quarterback situation. There also is other things that I do have my concerns about here. But I'm going to tell you all up front, I am not a Sam Darnold guy. I have never been a Sam Darnold guy. I doubted Sam Darnold for the vast majority of last season. There was a bit of a point, I would say maybe in the middle of the season, where I really started to maybe make that turn and go, okay, maybe he really did figure things out. But ultimately, those final 2 games of the season for the Vikings, where the lights were on the brightest, that last regular season game and their playoff game, crumbling against the pressure. And granted, you could maybe point to some of the issues on the offensive line by the tail end of that season for the Vikings, but we saw what Sam Darnold is, a guy who, in the right situation with everything right going on around him, can be a successful quarterback at the NFL level. But this is not really a perfect situation that Sam Darnold finds himself in, and that really concerns me. It starts with the offensive line play that has not been perfect over the last handful of years, especially in pass protection for the Seattle Seahawks, and that's something that if he's seeing the same amount of pressure that both Geno Smith and Russell Wilson before him were seeing, and the amount of times that both those quarterbacks were sacked during the last year or so, maybe 2 of Russell Wilson's time in Seattle, coupled with the stint that Geno Smith had in Seattle, I am genuinely concerned about the performance that you are going to get out of Sam Darnold for the amount of dollars that is being sent to his bank account each and every single week. It's just, I don't personally see a positive end result in this, and maybe I'm wrong, and I'll totally acknowledge that possibility, but there is a real concern in my eyes with the current situation. You couple that with the fact that the wide receiver room saw a bit of a dismantling this offseason, and I don't really know if I can say with a straight face that this wide receiver room with Jackson Smith and Jigba, Cooper Kupp, and Marquez Valdes-Scantling as potentially your top 3 guys in the wide receiver room. Maybe you could argue Jake Bobo makes his way in there, or maybe one of the 2 day 3 draft picks that they got in Torrey Horton or Ricky White III. I mean, maybe those guys battle for some spots there. I don't know if I can say that this wide receiver room is better than it was last year. Obviously, losing DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett this offseason. So the talent level, I don't think, is on par with what you were getting out of Minnesota in the wide receiver room. The tight end room, same idea. I am really interested in what Elijah Arroyo can do for this offense potentially as he develops and works his way in. I think there's a realistic possibility that Elijah Arroyo could be making some noise, if maybe not early in the season, by the midpoint of the season, as the top tight end target for this offense here, because I'm not super sold on Noah Fant at this point in his career, nor am I a super big fan of A.J. Barner as well. Some of the guys he will be battling for snaps with. So there, again, question marks after question marks after question marks. And then the running back room, again, you can do the same exact thing. Kenneth Walker and the health of him, and if he's able to recapture that magic we saw from his rookie season there, how much are you going to have to rely on Zach Charbonnet? There's just way too much uncertainty for me to feel extremely positive about this offense. But if you were to set everything aside and pick just one thing that I can keep going back to and keep harping on that I am just absolutely not sold on, it's going to be Sam Darnold. I don't buy into it. I do not buy into the excitement and the hype. Again, I almost kind of flipped on myself last year. I was banging the table about this was fool's gold early in the season. I will admit, got a little bit quiet during the midpoint of the season when things started to look really good, and I thought, all right, maybe he is turning the corner. But that epic collapse at the end of the year, it brought me right back to where I felt comfortable most, and that was just, listen, in the perfect situation, in a perfect storm, Sam Darnold can be a reliable option for you, but in an imperfect situation, you're going to get a similar guy to what you saw in the Jets, unfortunately. So with that, Seattle Seahawks sitting at the number 4 spot for me. Maybe I'm wrong, but this is one that I feel pretty confident about. Looking into the number 3 spot, I spent a lot of time flip-flopping between number 2 and number 3 for this one, specifically because I think there is a good case to be made for either one of these two teams here, where it feels like one team is ascending, the other one relying on a lot of just big names, known production, a team you can rely on and count on for the most part. But I ultimately settled on the Arizona Cardinals sitting at the number 3 spot here, and I should lay it out like this. There's a lot of positives and a lot of things that I like about this team, and it feels like they are trending in the right direction. They shocked a lot of people last season and a lot of football teams with some big upsets throughout the entirety of the season, winning games that a lot of people thought they had no business even being competitive in. But there is like a caveat or two to pick out. But like positively speaking, I'm a huge fan of James Conner. 18 total touchdowns and over 2,700 total yards from scrimmage in the last 2 years. I look at him as one of the most underappreciated backs in the NFL. And, the ageless James Conner at this point here, it feels like he's not slowing down at any point. And I think he's due for another really good season as well. There was nothing from last year that made me feel like his play could potentially drop off. Obviously, that's always in the cards. But, I mean, this is just a guy that does not get the love and respect he deserves around the league. And I really love what he's able to do for them. So I'm excited to see what he does in this stretch of just unbelievable play that he's been having during his 4 years in Arizona, especially these last 2. Trey McBride, obviously evolving into one of the top tight ends in the NFL. And it was a great time watching him do his thing last year. It was a really fun storyline to follow along with him as he, I believe, I can't remember if he broke the record or got close to the record. I'm pretty sure he broke the record though for number of receptions in a season without catching a single touchdown pass. Like following that storyline throughout all of last season was a really fun thing to watch as well. But over 1,100 yards on the season, he has evolved into one of the top pass-catching tight ends and just tight ends in general in the NFL. A guy that, of course, Kyler Murray can rely on over the middle. But the uncertainty that I was mentioning earlier really just comes down to what this wide receiver room is going to look like. And that is kind of what made me peel back a little bit on pushing them into the number 2 spot and having them flip here. And listen, Marvin Harrison Jr., I'm excited about what he can turn into. There were certain portions of the season last year where you go, man, this does not look like, with the pedigree that he has and the draft position you took him in, like this guy, like you're hoping that this guy comes out of the gates, monster numbers, over 1,000 yards. He did sniff nearly double-digit touchdowns sitting at 8, but you're expecting the world from him. And again, a little bit of a shaky performance here or there throughout the season. I am anticipating that he steps up and he's going well over 1,000 yards. He's probably crossing double-digit touchdowns. I am a huge Marvin Harrison fan, and so by default, it makes me a massive fan of his son's game as well, and I'm really hoping he can evolve with everything that he has, the size and the physical attributes that his dad didn't necessarily have, that he's able to bring from the tutelage, or along with the tutelage from his father. Like, I am pumped to watch Marvin Harrison grow and learn in the NFL, and I'm expecting a monster year number 2 after him getting acclimated to the speed of the NFL last year. And then after him is where like the question marks start to come into play for me, because Michael Wilson's been serviceable, but like, is he a true number 2 option? He had a little bit over 500 yards last season, but not really a guy that's like wowed you by any means to this point in his young career. And then guys alongside him, I mean, Greg Dortch, Zay Jones, just to name a few of the guys, or I mean, Xavier Weaver, Simi Fehoko. Like, there's not a ton that I'm super excited about with this wide receiver room beyond a Marvin Harrison Jr. So if the wide receiver room was a little bit stronger, I'd feel a lot more better about putting this team in number 2, because again, Kyler Murray, especially it feels like each and every single week that we watched him last year, as he got further and further and further away from the injury that he dealt with the season prior and everything. It just felt like he was getting more and more comfortable in this offense with each and every single passing week. And I think this year will hopefully be the culmination of him in the current system that they're working with in Arizona. And this should be potentially one of his best seasons to this point. Now, if we don't get that, then that's a whole other conversation to have when we get there down the road. But I feel like a lot of things are trending positively for this team. I feel pretty good about their offensive line as well. I maybe would have liked to see them be a little bit more aggressive in trying to upgrade the unit, but I mean, as things stand right now, like I won't sit here and say that I absolutely love the offensive line, but I'm not going to sit here and say I dislike the offensive line either. I think it's a unit that they can absolutely work with, and they can get done what they want to get done with it. So it's a pretty good unit, to say the least. If the wide receiver room was just a little bit more stronger, I'd be more inclined to have them sitting at the number 2 spot. Now, the team I juggled them a ton with here, and I already kind of alluded to who they are, so you may or may not have an idea as to who it's going to be, but I ultimately settled on the San Francisco 49ers at the number 2 spot here. Now, there is a few ifs, ands, or buts about this team, and I do have some concern around this team as well, and maybe I'm giving the 49ers a little bit more benefit of the doubt because they have that big name brand value with this offense here. Of course, you get the return of Brandon Ayuk, and then on top of that, Christian McCaffrey as well. If those two guys can come back, and I mean, if they're even at like 80 to 90% of what their form was prior to going down with the injuries, and Christian McCaffrey, who just dealt with what felt like just injuries for varying stretches of last season. I mean, he had the bilateral Achilles tendonitis that he dealt with for the first like half of the season, and then he had the PCL injury that knocked him out for like a month and a half or so last season as well. So I mean, there's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts surrounding the health and just the ability that those two guys, him being McCaffrey and Ayuk, and what they can get back to doing. But in the absence of those two guys, there were positive performances that you can look at and feel pretty good about. I think Ricky Pearsall showed some nice sparks here and there for the offense. Juwan Jennings, that had to be one of my favorite things to watch coming out of last season, because he was someone who stepped up and stepped up big time. Like, he looked like a legit wide receiver 1 for you in varying points of the season last year. And it sounds like the 49ers, at the very least, expect to see that same exact effort and potentially even more from him in this offense this year, especially with Brandon Ayuk returning. Like, there's a really good opportunity for Jennings now to have another big name wide receiver working opposite of him in Ayuk. And if that's the case, things could open up even further for him, and we can go from a guy who nearly sniffed 1,000 yards at 975, and maybe he's pushing over 1,000 yards this season, because clearly he and Brock Purdy had a nice connection going there last season. George Kittle, obviously another monster season for him. I mean, that's arguably like, that last year was arguably like his second, if not maybe third best season of his entire career as a pass catcher. So, I mean, plenty to like with what the offense has all around. The offensive line, I mean, if they stay healthy, I'm not super worried about. This is a unit that I'm a little bit iffy on right now, but I mean, you still have, of course, Trent Williams anchoring the left tackle spot. I will be curious to see how some of these other guys do, like Ben Barch and Dominic Puny. Like, there are some questions that I have here, but it's more just like, let me just see it, and if it looks good, it looks good, and I'm not too worried about it. But the buck for me, and this is going to be, I'm sure this will get the comment section going here. I am a little bit concerned about just Brock Purdy. Guys paid like an absolute stud, and all credit in the world for what he has been able to do, being Mr. Irrelevant out of his draft class. But I've got to say, I am somewhat concerned. Yes, you've made it to a Super Bowl appearance with him, and the 49ers have been contending as long as he's been healthy, but there were games last season when things got really rough. And again, I'm aware, injuries, we just talked a lot about them, were affecting this team in a number of different ways at varying points throughout the season. 12 interceptions last season, not a ridiculous number, but it was 3 multi-interception games, one of them being that 3-interception game against the Kansas City Chiefs. There are bad habits that I feel like Brock Purdy falls into at times when the going gets really tough. Like, he's got a ton of mental toughness, and I feel like he was challenged to the absolute max last year and really had his abilities tested. And when the going got extremely rough, it felt like he was just willing to put balls in places they should not have been. I'm a little bit concerned about that. I think that does get alleviated this year, and obviously if everyone stays healthy or as healthy as possible, as an NFL 17-game season will allow you to, I think, the 49ers would be in a good spot, but there were just some glaring issues that stuck out to me last year that if we see more of, that contract that he was just paid really scares me. I'm not surprised he got signed by it by any means. I know a lot of people are shouting to the rooftops overpaid. I'm not sitting here saying that. The market sets what the market is for quarterback play, and Brock Purdy has done a lot for the 49ers organization, considering where he was taken in the draft. And in the draft, he was taken in with who was taken at number 3 for the 49ers in that very same draft. But I do have my concerns and reservations about him. And it's just one of those things that we'll see if my concerns are for good reason, or maybe I was just reading too much into some mistakes during a really tough season where a ton of injuries were affecting the offense. We'll see. But I'm willing to acknowledge all of that. And then, of course, at the number 1 spot, the LA Rams. Listen, for an offense that didn't really see a ton of turnover here. Obviously, Jonah Jackson no longer a part of the team, but he did miss time last season due to injuries. I look at the addition of Davante Adams to the wide receiver room as a massive plus, and his availability is something that I think when you compare essentially the 1-to-1 swap out of Cooper Kupp for Davante Adams, I think it's a net positive here. You look at what he was able to do last season on a Jets offense that was about as dysfunctional as you could possibly imagine, and even during the little bit of time he played in Las Vegas before ultimately getting traded, 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns. And if you want to say that Rodgers is force-feeding him the football, by all means, you can make that argument. But at the end of the day, it's still up to Davante Adams to get himself open, create that separation, and come down with the football. So if you're able to feed him the ball that much, he's clearly doing something right. If everyone knows that's where the football's going, especially when you got to the tail end of the season and that's your argument, he was still getting open and still making plays. It's not like it's some easy thing to just feed a guy a football. Like, they do still have to get open. They still have to win their matchups. So I never really understood that argument, and I have seen people make it. So I'm not on that train. I think that this was a net positive for the offense here. I think with him, combined with what Puka Nacua can do, you have a really good wide receiver room to work with here. On top of that, you look at the injuries last season, this is another team, especially along the offensive line. I mean, you basically walked into week number 2 with what felt like 2 or 3, I think it was, offensive linemen that were down and out for the count for a stretch of time. Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp ultimately eventually going down at the same time as well, not too long after that. And it was still a team that battled its way into the playoffs come season end. So with a healthier season, this is a team offensively that can absolutely make some noise. Matthew Stafford, depending on who you talk to, I would say, just off the top without naming people, I would say Matthew Stafford probably still belongs within the top 10, if not maybe top 12 quarterbacks conversation in the NFL. And I don't think it's unrealistic to have him at number 10 if you want to put him in the top 10, or maybe even 9 or 8. He is one of those guys, and I love his game, respect his game, love everything he's about and what he's been able to do through his entire career from Detroit now into LA. So great situation with the quarterback. You have a phenomenal young, or not young, I guess now, but I still think of Sean McVay as like the young guy they hired, but he is getting older now at this point, but still one of the younger minds in the NFL. Offensive mastermind is Sean McVay. Kyron Williams, another one of those guys that I feel like people are finally starting to catch on to what he's able to do, but I mean, this is a guy when the offense is able to move through the air and everyone isn't just focused on him. You look at the numbers, 2,800 yards and 31 total touchdowns from scrimmage in the last 2 seasons. When he's healthy and defenses aren't just selling out for the run because the entire wide receiver room is ripped to shreds and the offensive line has gaping holes due to injuries, he's the guy that can get it done, and he can match with the best of them as far as running backs are concerned. Another one of those guys that, again, I feel like people are finally starting to catch on to his game. I consider still an underappreciated back in the league and a guy that I really love to watch play. This is the Rams division to lose in my eyes. I know that's going beyond the scope of just offenses and what we're supposed to be talking about here, but I look at the Rams as like a legitimate playoff contender, and in the current situation that they're in right now with the way things are shaping up, especially with how this offense looks going into the 2025 season, this should be the most explosive offense in the NFC West in my eyes. And honestly, it could even go a little bit beyond just NFC West. And that's a conversation we'll have for another day, but I expect and anticipate a really good year offensively, so long as everyone stays healthy, from this Rams team. And I think the Davante Adams thing, to go back to the very beginning of my point of this team being at number one, is going to be a huge factor in that. I think that Davante Adams still has plenty to give in the NFL, and he's one of those guys that he plays the technical aspect of the game so much better than a lot of receivers that even though he's on the wrong side of 30 right now and aging, he can still get away with a lot because of the things he does with his eyes, with his hands, how late he is to do those things to throw defenders off. Like, there's a lot about Davante Adams' game that extends just beyond physical attributes, and it's more along the mental and technique side of things. So I'm looking forward to that offense, and I'm looking forward to see what the Rams do. But those are my thoughts on the NFC West. Again, comment down below. Thoughts, opinions, agreements, disagreements, rankings. How would you rank the division? Let me hear from you all. But as always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it. And I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.